Right now, it's football at 4. Johnny Mac's in the house. We'll do a little football here. NFL draft coverage brought to you by 1 Hour Heating and Cooling Air Conditioning. Give them a call, 609-641-7777 for your air quality options. The draft tomorrow night. John and I will break it down. We got plenty to talk about here on the Sports Bash. But, John, we'll start with my conversation earlier with Malik Jackson. Kind of confirmed something that you've said on the show a lot. I mean, I asked him flat out, would he rather be playing end or be a part of a three-man rotation? He said diplomatically, I'll do what they ask me to, but I prefer to be a part of a three-man rotation. So it'll be interesting to see how that all goes down once training camp opens.
Yeah, I've kind of, told the listeners repeatedly, Malik has told me personally that he prefers not to play defensive end because he's asked a lot. He's 6'5". And he looks like a defensive end with his length. So I think just people naturally assume he would like it because generally pass rushers and defensive linemen, they like to get after the quarterback. So, the preference, I think, for most people would be to play wide nine, just pin your ears back and go after the quarterback. But Malik enjoys being inside, enjoys being that interior presence, that pass rusher that's so important when you're affecting quarterbacks and getting them off their spots. That's what he loves to do. And ultimately, I do think the Eagles are going to say, look, I mean, Benny Curry's not going to be back, most likely, still a free agent, but it's pretty clear the Eagles want to go in a different direction, don't want to go down that route of too many veterans. And, you start looking at the rotation. Obviously, Jim Schwartz likes to use a rotation, and you want to get your best players on the field. Cox and Javon Hargrave have to be out there. So how do you get Malik Jackson more time? He's got to kick out, play a little bit inside, play a little bit outside as well, and then you could get his reps up. So I think that's the Eagles' plan, and we'll see if he embraces it. And I think he's going to have to be honest.
Right, and he signed that 3-year, $30 million deal, which I guess the Eagles could have got out of that deal if they wanted to. Them bringing him back kind of shows that he is certainly going to be in their plans.
Yeah, for now, I mean, it's difficult. You can move on from anybody, really. I mean, if you really, really want to, and you've seen some really big contracts, people will eat them at certain points. But it's a little bit easier to move on after this year. And they could certainly do so if things don't go well this season. And that would certainly be the Eagles' preference. They still think he's got plenty of gas in the tank. Obviously, he only played about 40-something snaps before he got hurt in the first game, late in the first game. So, that's another year off the tread, so to speak, for an aging player. I mean, essentially, he didn't play last year with only those 40 snaps. So they thought he could play before the injury. He hasn't been worn down. If anything, his body has had a chance to rejuvenate. Now, you're always concerned with a Liz Frank injury that you lose some of that explosion, so you have to keep an eye on that. But from an overall body perspective, he should be, if anything, raring to go and better than he would have been last year.
Johnny Mac's with us at JF McMullen. Of course, football at 4 here on the Sports Bash. If you missed my conversation with Malik Jackson, check it out on our website, 973ESPN.com. I want to go back to what happened yesterday real quick with Brady and Gronk. Gronkowski said he currently weighs 250 pounds. So he's got some interesting workouts to have to do to get ready. But I guess the question moving forward will be, what happens with the trio of tight ends they have there? Do you think O.J. Howard is something, because there's been some reports that O.J. Howard to the Patriots is a possibility? Does Arians, because Anthony Beck brought up an interesting point, that Bruce Arians, he doesn't like to use the tight end all that much, and now he's got 3 of them down there.
Yeah, Bruce likes to go vertical. It's interesting, though, because, Tom Brady turns 43 in August. I mean, he's not a vertical passer at this point. So there's a lot of confliction in this whole thought process. If you think about a typical Bruce Arians offense, I mean, Tom has dominated in the second stage of his career inside, the running backs, the tight ends, all that in-breaking stuff over the middle of the field. So tight ends better be important. He's got to figure that out, Bruce Arians. I mean, he's got to adjust his thinking to the talent on hand. And if you have, as I said, a 43-year-old quarterback whose strength is now of those in-breaking routes dominating the middle of the field, and you have arguably the best tight end of all time, well, you better use him. I mean, that's just the way it is. You might want to push the ball down the field, but this isn't 25-year-old Tom Brady. That's just not the strength of his game. So I think from that standpoint, when you look at Arians and what he has, I mean, it's the coach's responsibility to take advantage of what he has, and that means he's got to utilize tight ends. Now, while I say that, he's not keeping all three. We all know that, and O.J. Howard's the one that's going to go. So now you have the gamesmanship from the Bucs, and they say, well, this is a really good player. We're not just going to give him away, and you play that game of we're not going to – we plan on keeping him versus to drive up any potential get back you can receive from another team in this league. But I don't think there's any question that one of the three is gone. We know it's not Gronk. It's probably not going to be Cameron Brate, so it's going to be O.J. Howard.
Yeah, Howard, there are some murmurs about him and New England, that New England is a distinct possibility that he could land there, and the scenario is very much alive, according to CBS's Jason La Canfora. And Howard obviously was a high first-round pick, but was a little bit of a disappointing player out of Alabama, I guess you can say. But, I mean, I guess some of that has to do with Arians. I guess seeing what Howard did with Arians, you wonder what kind of production Rob Gronkowski is going to get down there. And as you just kind of chronicled, we'll see if they change this offense a little bit. Anthony, when I had him on about a month ago, he thought getting Brady made them a Super Bowl contender. Gronk, obviously, he's not changing his mind there. Does Gronk change the expectations for Tampa Bay for you?
Sure. I mean, when we last saw him, he was the best tight end in football. There were some, as I said, he was yesterday on the show, he was banged up a little bit, but I think if you go back to the Super Bowl, he pretty much dominated. And the championship game, he played well in that. So when he was healthy, he was still playing at a high level. And that's what you expect from Rob Gronkowski. Mm-hmm. You do have some issues that he lost weight. He said today he didn't lose as much as people think. He said he was down to 250 or so, and he plays at about 265. So he's got to put back on the weight, and we'll see if he's the same player. Again, what I just said about Malik Jackson in a different way could prove to be true for Rob Gronkowski, in the fact that maybe he took a year off, maybe he recharged the batteries, maybe he's not as banged up as he was before, and maybe it's helpful. But, I mean, this guy, Mike, retired in the prime of his career. It wasn't like he was a descending player at the tail end of his career. This is not Tom Brady at 43. This is the best tight end in football who still had a lot of gas left in the tank if he wanted to continue to play. So I think from that standpoint, it's a little bit different.
You segued so nicely into my next topic, which is a guy who retired early because he had migraines, is what I recall, right? Percy Harvin called it quits because he kept having migraine problems. He's only 31 years old, and reports are that he is ready to return. Well, he's fast, he's explosive, he was a playmaker, and he wants to come back and play. You know the question. The Eagles need a wide receiver. Is this a cheap alternative that you can go down the Percy? I know you tweet it. You don't want the questions, but it's football at 4, my man.
No, it is not a possibility. I keep going back. You know, people never look. I hope Percy and Percy at his height early in his career with Minnesota, even when you go back to when he went to Seattle in the Super Bowl at MetLife Stadium against the Broncos, he's the one who returned the kickoff for a touchdown. He's one of the most explosive playmakers I've ever seen live, but he hasn't played in a big way since. He hasn't played since 2016. He hasn't had significant snaps since 2014. And, I've said it consistently throughout this offseason. The Eagles want a young receiver. They want somebody to grow with Carson Wentz. They want somebody who hasn't been exposed to other offenses, other schemes. And, oh, by the way, Percy was a giant pain in the you-know-what. So I hope he's matured. I hope he gets another chance somewhere, but it's not going to be in Philadelphia. Not a chance in the world.
It's worth it. It's worth a question, though, right? I mean, he's a receiver. He had a name.
He's a receiver. He's still young enough to play, but again, he hasn't. We're in. Last time I looked, we're in 2020. He hasn't played significantly since 2014. He burned out so early in his career. A lot of that burnout. You mentioned the migraines. I hate to be one of those. I mean, but the lightened restrictions on marijuana probably has something to do with him coming back. He doesn't have to worry about that any longer. So from that standpoint, it's a little bit safer from teams' perspective. It will be cheap. I mean, he's going to get a veteran minimum deal. Nobody's going to give him more than that. He's been out of the league for so long. And again, if you watch Percy, just go on YouTube and type in Percy Harvin. You will. This is one of the guys at the forefront of the spread and shred game that we see today. I mean, this is the manufactured touch. This is the guy who can create magic in space.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
He's intriguing. He's intriguing.
He's intriguing if he was the same guy as he was, but A, that's unlikely. And B, and again, remember, and here's the back end part of it. The draft is Thursday.
Tomorrow.
It is, yeah. It is supposed to be the deepest receiver class in 20 years. So teams looking for receivers are going to have multitudes of options, even going into the third and fourth round of the draft. You see guys on the street now. Forget about Antonio Brown and Josh Gordon, players like that, because they have such off-the-field problems. There's issues with that. But you got a Des Bryant, for instance, who wants back in the league, and they can't get jobs. And Percy's going to get a job 6 years off playing meaningful football. It's going to be difficult for him.
John McMullen, Football at 4. Yeah, I mean, I think, I read too, he hasn't played since the migraine problem back in 2016 was the last time he really played any meaningful. But I guess it was his skill set that makes it a question because, as you mentioned, he was a playmaker.
At the height, he, as I said, he's one of the most explosive playmakers. And the issue was that was one of the major issues with his longevity. He was a manufactured touch guy. And things are a little bit different now. So back then, it was more difficult for coaches, for guys who didn't have a sharp understanding of the entire route tree. They wanted more of a well-rounded receiver. And it became almost a problem when you have to keep going back to that. Remember, when you're on the sidelines game day, it's 40 seconds, 40 seconds, 40 seconds, and you got to make mental notes. You're doing things so quickly. You're doing things as a play caller. You're trying to think ahead 2-3 plays, and then you got to say, oh, I got to get a manufactured touch for this explosive guy. Coaches weren't as good at it back then. They've gotten better at it as the game has evolved and changed, and now everybody's looking for that type of player. And he really – there's nobody in this draft, last draft, there's nobody that was better in space than Percy Harvin at his height. But that is a long time ago.
All right, a couple draft things. Yesterday we had Scott Wright from Draft Countdown on, and he was on right before you, and we were talking a lot of wide receivers. And I went back and listened to the conversation for a post that I wrote today, and a couple things stood out. I want to get your reaction. One, he said, quote, if the Eagles were picking 10, I think Ruggs is still the best fit. In other words, he thinks of all the skill sets, Jerry Jeudy, obviously CeeDee Lamb, and Ruggs, that Ruggs' skill set is what the Eagles need the most. Would you concur with that? And if you were at 10, would you take Ruggs over the other guys if you had a choice?
No, I take CeeDee Lamb. I think, for obvious reasons, because of what happened last season, people are obsessed with speed when it comes to the Eagles. And understandably so, because once Deshaun Jackson went down, they just didn't have that in their offense. But I often say they really did. It's just the guy couldn't make plays, and that's Nelson Agholor, because Nelson can run. And I've said it 100 times on this show. Getting behind people was never, ever a problem for Nelson Agholor. Just couldn't do the other things. Couldn't catch the football consistently. Couldn't track the football. We talked about it a lot. The Eagles need a playmaker. And playmakers come in different shapes and sizes. And, could be the big guy, Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins. Could be the small guy, Tyreek Hill, the small, fast guy. So, I mean, from the Eagles' perspective, they want a guy who can make plays. And that's why I think their board is Lamb, Jefferson, Ruggs, Jeudy of the top four. I think that's how the Eagles have them graded. I think that's the way they would go. And their concern is a guy who can make plays. And I mentioned it yesterday on the show with Andy Weidel. He said it. He basically said it. He didn't give you a name, but he told you what he wanted. And he wanted a guy, what I just said about Percy Harvin. He wanted a guy who can win in space. And that's why if you go down later, the Jalen Ragers, the Brandon Ayuk's, those types of receivers, the Eagles just want somebody who can make plays. Mm-hmm. And they all can, but their preference is that guy. It's not just, okay, Ruggs runs 4.27. He's faster than them, so we're going to take him. And I think too many people default to that with the Eagles because of what happened last season.
Well, it's funny. He described Justin Jefferson as a bigger, far more reliable version of Nelson Agholor.
Yeah, I've seen a couple, and that's going to scare people to death.
I said, you say that around here, you're going to have Justin Jefferson run out of town.
I know. And I tweeted this today. I hate comps. I hate comps of players for two reasons. One, people don't understand you're comparing traits. You are comparing traits. You are not comparing outcomes. So what I just said, the good stuff about Nelson Agholor, completely right. Justin Jefferson's got no problem getting separation, no problem getting behind people, good route runner, refined route runner, and then he finishes on the back end. He catches the football, he makes plays, and he made plays on the best college football team in the best conference against the best teams on the biggest stage. So when they played the best teams at Clemson and they were in the playoffs, he got better. So when you're talking about the stage, that's not a problem as well. And that's exactly what the Eagles are looking for. But when you comp the traits with Nelson Agholor, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because Nelson had all the traits to be a star in this league when you break it down and you talk about his speed, which I mentioned,
and
his route running,
and what he said too
really
is
good.
What he said, a far more reliable. I think that's the key. If you get Nelson Agholor, that's great. A far more reliable version is really good.
Well, yeah, a guy who catches, because that's really consistently. That's really the only thing Nelson couldn't do, because he was the best route runner on the team. He was right there he was certainly the fastest receiver until Deshaun got back, and you could argue he would tell you he's faster. But, at 32, maybe he is. faster than Jackson. So that's what people are comping. They're not comping the outcome. They're not saying he's going to become Nelson Agholor. They're comparing their skill sets. And then the second reason I don't like comps is it's not fair because you have now people have compared CeeDee Lamb to DeAndre Hopkins. Well, that's unfair too, because are people going to expect DeAndre Hopkins? That's unfair to a young kid. So either way, I don't like comps.
John McMullen, we'll leave you with this one, too. Give me a name. He mentioned 53, KJ Hamler. I hear that name a lot. You said it yesterday because of Penn State. But the depth at the wide receiver spot seems to be, plentiful. He mentioned 3 guys in the third, 3 guys in the fourth, said I could do 5th, 6th, 7th, and that there's going to be free agent receivers this year that are going to be better than guys drafted in the last couple years draft here. So at 53, are there certain guys that you think, whether wide receiver or other, that, hey, in that second round, there's these couple guys to keep an eye on because they would be a good fit?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's tons of receivers, so it kind of depends. Obviously, if you get a receiver in the first round, it doesn't matter. But if you're talking about you don't get the receiver in the first round and you're forced to stay at 53, and Hamler's a little bit what I just said about Henry Ruggs. I mean, people default to him not only because he can run, but because he's also small. And he kind of looks like Deshaun Jackson. But him, to me, he's more of a slot receiver. So if the Eagles are forced to take someone at 53 at receiver, and as I said, they weren't able to get the receiver in the first round, I think you're hopeful of somebody slipping in that second tier that we always talk about. I don't think Jalen Reagor's going to fall that far. Laviska Shenault possibly could fall that far. And then you talk about Michael Pittman Jr. I think he might be one of the most underrated receivers in this draft.
USC.
But the problem with him is, he's a big-bodied, contested catch guy, and that's kind of redundant to J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. And the Eagles haven't given up on Arcega-Whiteside, even though the fan base may have. So that might be too much redundancy. Denzel Mims we've talked about in the past a lot. I think he's going to fall a little bit, but he made those comments about Philadelphia and being scared to be here, so who knows? Who knows how that happens. Van Jefferson is a guy I love. He's best route runner in this draft, but he'll probably go in the third round. Chase Claypool is too big, similar to what I said about Michael Pittman
Let me
Jr.
stop you about Claypool real fast. I'd like to pick I'm glad you brought him up. What is it about Claypool? I mean, he is a big dude. He ran like the wind. I mean, wasn't he? He had like the fastest time.
Yeah.
I mean, he reminds me of what happened with Metcalf last year, where people for some reason just didn't like him. And he's a senior too, so he's got an extra year. I don't know if that helps or hurts him at all, but it seems like, why is a guy who is that big and that fast not getting? I mean, this guy's 6'4", 240 pounds, and ran a 4.40.
Yeah, I mean, he's the closest thing we've seen physically since Calvin Johnson, just from a measurable standpoint, from being that big and that strong and that fast and being able to move. But he's not as refined as a receiver, doesn't run routes well, really doesn't play as big as he is, and as big as strong. And maybe that light switch goes on at some point, and maybe you do have a superstar. But that's kind of why he's fallen a little bit. And some teams look at him and say he's a tight end. And some people are speculating that he would move to the flex tight end position in the NFL. I think he's got a chance to be one of those guys. When you talk in the scouting community now, Mike, they're using this positionless player term, but they're usually using it for defensive players on the back seven, and the Eagles have used it with Jalen Mills. They used Malcolm Jenkins that way for a long time, just moved him all over the chessboard. If I'm a team in the second round, I pick Chase Claypool I don't care if you're playing him at receiver, flex him out. What is the difference?
Yeah.
It's a matchup nightmare.
Exactly.
Call him whatever you want.
Yep.
Call him offensive weapon.
Well,
but yeah, I think he would be a great player on a lot of teams. I don't think he fits here because you already have Zach Ertz, you already have Dallas Goedert, you already have that inside, and there's some redundancy again. So I don't think it necessarily fits in Philadelphia, but I love the player.
All right, tomorrow we got plenty more on the draft, moving around, guys that John likes, and more at JF McMullen. And, of course, tomorrow, football at 4 right here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN, the free mobile app. John, sleep on it. Tomorrow, the day is finally here. Although, I guess we could use more time on it.
I got a spoiler for you.
Yeah?
Match game. I wasn't talking about the NFL draft.
Oh, match game. Match game.
Shows.
All right. Well, we got match game has been coming in a lot on the text board. Yes, top 5 at 5 tonight. Our favorite game shows. Match game. I'm interested to see if Pete was a match game guy.
Pete, I guarantee you, Pete.
Spoiler for me: match game did not make my top 5.
Ooh, that's a bad job by you.
All right, pal. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. See you, Mike.
Johnny Mac, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.